There's a smell you never quite forget. Not a grand smell, not perfume, not fresh bread from a proper bakery. No, it's cheaper than that. It's a paper bag, a small white paper bag, slightly translucent where the sugar has soaked through, twisted at the top the way only a corner shop owner's fingers could twist it. You're 7 years old. You've got a warm 10-pence piece in your fist, and the entire world, your entire world, is behind that glass counter. That's where it started for most of us. Not in some gleaming supermarket aisle with fluorescent lighting and a loyalty card scheme. In a corner shop that smelled of dust and newsprint and something sweet, always something sweet that you could never quite name but would spend the rest of your life chasing. This is the story of the sweets that built British childhoods. The ones they took away. The ones that probably almost certainly did real damage to our teeth. The ones we'd give almost anything to have back. The 1960s and 1970s in Britain were not comfortable decades. Not if you grew up on a council estate or in a terraced house where the walls sweated damp in November. The winters were savage. The winter of 1963 remains the coldest recorded in Britain since 1740, with temperatures dropping to -20 degrees Celsius in parts of Scotland and the Thames freezing solid for the first time in living memory. Coal fires burned all day, and the windows still had ice on the inside. Money was tight in a way that people who grew up later simply do not understand. A working man's wage in 1970 was roughly £23 a week before tax. The rent on a council house might be £2 or £3. A pint of milk was less than 5 pence. And a black jack, that flat, rectangular, aniseed-flavored chew wrapped in a waxy black wrapper with a pirate's face grinning at you, cost 1 penny, 1 single penny. That mattered. It mattered enormously. Because when you had 6 pence in your pocket on a Saturday morning, you weren't poor. You were rich. You could walk into that corner shop and buy 6 sweets, 6 entire sweets, and they were yours. Chosen by you, held by you, unwrapped at your own pace on the walk home while your mate tried to blag one off you. Black jacks were always divisive. Some kids loved them with a passion that bordered on obsession, that dense, rubbery chew, the aniseed so sharp it made your eyes water slightly, the way it turned your tongue and teeth completely black so you spent the afternoon looking like you'd been chewing coal. Which, given the era, wasn't entirely out of the question. Others couldn't stand them. But that was the point. They were a penny each, and their companion in that same penny-sweet world, the fruit salad chew, was almost the mirror opposite. Strawberry and pineapple flavor. Still that same flat rectangular shape. Still that same waxy wrapper. Pink instead of black. Both manufactured by Barats. Both introduced in the early 1960s. Both still technically available today in some form, but not like that. Never quite like that. Then there was the sherbet fountain. Now this was engineering. This was a product of genuine genius, and I will not hear otherwise. A yellow cardboard tube, about the length of your middle finger, filled with white sherbet so fine it was practically powder. And inserted into the top of that tube a hollow licorice straw, a black, slightly bitter, chewy licorice straw, through which you were expected to suck the sherbet upward. Nobody did, of course. Everyone bit the end off the licorice immediately and poured the sherbet directly into their mouth, then spent 30 seconds unable to breathe properly while it fizzed violently on their tongue. Barats made those, too. They cost 2 pence in the early 1970s, which represented a significant investment in the penny-sweet economy. Worth every fraction of it. The sherbet itself was simple. Bicarbonate of soda, citric acid, sugar. That's the fizz. That's the science acid meeting bicarbonate, releasing carbon dioxide on your tongue. It sounds like a chemistry lesson. It felt like something close to magic when you were 8. Spangles are the ones the older generation get most emotional about, and I understand why, because Spangles were genuinely different to everything else. Launched by Mars in 1950, they were boiled sweets in a distinctive, flat, octagonal shape. Hard, glassy, intensely flavored Old English Spangles came in flavors like pear drops, aniseed, gong gaik, fruit spangles in strawberry, orange, blackcurrant. A tube of 8 cost 4 pence in the mid-1960s, and by the late 1970s they were still only a few pence a pack. Mars discontinued them in 1984. Just gone. No fanfare, no ceremony, no warning. One day they were in the shops, the next they weren't. People have been asking Mars to bring them back for 4 decades now. They did briefly a limited relaunch in 1995 for a year and then gone again. There's a petition for their return somewhere online with thousands of signatures. I'm not ashamed to say I've signed it. But if blackjacks and sherbet fountains and spangles were the currency of the corner shop, the everyday small change of childhood, then Woolworth's Pick and Mix was the cathedral. The high church, the place you went on special occasions, or when a relative had given you a 50-pence piece and you felt briefly, giddily wealthy. Every Woolworth's had one. That long counter with the plastic bins, deep plastic bins with hinged lids, each one holding a different sweet, the white paper bags on a metal spike beside it, the little chrome scoop, and the sign above it that said what was perhaps the most democratically perfect phrase in the English language: pick and mix. Choose your own. Decide for yourself. Nobody tells you how many cola bottles versus how many fried eggs versus how many white chocolate mice. You are the architect here. You are in charge. Woolworths had been on British high streets since 1909, when the American chain opened its first British store in Liverpool. By the 1970s, there were over 300 stores across the country, and by the 1980s, closer to 800. The pick and mix section, formally standardized and expanded from the late 1960s onward, became arguably the defining memory of the brand for anyone who grew up in that era. You could spend 20 minutes choosing a 50-pence bag, 20 minutes of genuine, agonizing, joyful decision-making. Fizzy cola bottles at a certain price per 100 grams, jelly snakes, chocolate limes, those white and pink shrimps, sugar-coated foam sweets shaped like prawns, which is an absolutely absurd concept when you think about it now, but which tasted somewhere between vanilla and strawberry and nothing else on earth. The prices in the Woolworths Pick and Mix changed over the decades, of course. In the early 1970s, you could fill a reasonable bag for 10 or 15 pence. By the mid-1980s, inflation, which peaked at 24.2% in 1975, the highest rate Britain had seen since the First World War, had pushed confectionery prices up significantly. The penny sweet was increasingly becoming the twopenny sweet, and then the 2 for 5 pence sweet. The economic backdrop of 1970s Britain was brutal. 3-day working weeks in 1974 because of the miners' strike and the oil crisis, power cuts that meant families sat around candles not as a romantic gesture but because there was genuinely no electricity. Bread rationing was discussed in Parliament in 1974, though it never came to pass. Against that backdrop, against cold houses and uncertain wages and fathers coming home from work looking gray with exhaustion, a small bag of sweets from the corner shop wasn't a luxury. It was a lifeline. A small, sugar-coated insistence that life still had sweetness in it. What about the things that were even cheaper? Even more available, even more basic? The refresher, a pressed chalk powder, sweet, almost, in fruit flavors, tart and granular, that dissolved on your tongue, leaving a slightly gritty residue, a penny each. The Palma Violet, which divided an entire generation, a small purple tablet that tasted of perfume, literally of perfume, of the kind of floral scent your nan wore, and which somehow was marketed to children as a sweet, and which some of us genuinely loved and others found deeply, profoundly wrong. They're still made. By Swizzles. I don't know how. I don't know why. I'm glad they are. There were Mojo's chewy fruit-flavored sweets in waxed wrappers, similar to fruit salads but slightly different in texture. A penny each through most of the 1970s. Love Hearts, those small pressed sugar discs with romantic phrases stamped into them that tasted of nothing much but which you'd give to a girl or a boy in your class, because it was cheaper and less terrifying than saying anything out loud. Flying saucers, those rice paper discs filled with sherbet that dissolved on your tongue, the paper and the powder together, which felt genuinely otherworldly for reasons you couldn't articulate when you were 9. Cola bottles, jelly babies, gobstoppers that changed color as you sucked them so you had to keep pulling them out to check your progress. And gobstoppers, proper gobstoppers, the large ones, a sphere of compressed boiled sugar the size of a marble or larger, which you genuinely could not fit comfortably in your mouth, and which the name described with alarming accuracy. Those were tuppence or 3 pence. They lasted 30 minutes. The economy on those was extraordinary. If you were good with money, a gobstopper was the rational choice. Almost no child was good with money. Now, here's what I want to know from you. What was your absolute favorite sweet from back then? The one you'd choose if you had your 10-pence piece and your whole Saturday morning ahead of you? Put it in the comments below. I want to know, because I genuinely believe the answer tells you something about who you were and maybe who you still are. Because here's where it starts to get harder to talk about. Here's where the story turns. The sweets didn't all disappear at once. That's not how these things work. They drained away slowly, a discontinuation here, a recipe change there, a brand bought out by a conglomerate that had no particular attachment to keeping the original formula. The economics of small batch, labor-intensive confectionery manufacturing became increasingly brutal through the 1980s and into the 1990s. The big players, Mars, Cadbury, Roundtree's before Nestlé swallowed it whole in 1988 could survive through scale. The smaller manufacturers couldn't. Barrett's, the company that gave us Black Jacks and fruit salads and sherbet fountains, was sold multiple times over the decades, eventually folding into Tangerine Confectionery. The products survived the mergers, more or less, but something changed in the formulas, something in the texture, the intensity of flavor. Additives legislation changed things too. The artificial colorings that gave 1970s sweets their almost violent hues, the screaming reds, the electric yellows, the deep purples came under increasing scrutiny. A study published in 2007 by Southampton University, commissioned by the Food Standards Agency, found that 6 specific artificial food colorings combined with the preservative sodium benzoate had a measurable effect on hyperactivity in children. The so-called Southampton 6, sunset yellow, quinoline yellow, carmazine, allura red, tartrazine, and ponceau 4R. By 2010, the European Food Safety Authority had mandated warning labels on products containing these dyes. Many manufacturers simply removed them rather than put the label on. The colors faded. The sweets changed. Were those colorings actively harmful? Almost certainly not in the quantities found in a penny sweet. But the flavor profiles changed when the chemistry changed. And there was something else, something more fundamental that altered the landscape of British confectionery from the early 1990s onward. The corner shop itself began to disappear. The independent corner shop, the newsagent with the sweet counter, the off-license with the penny tray by the till, had been under pressure since the late 1970s, when major supermarket chains began their relentless expansion into retail food. Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, the deep discount operators, they could buy confectionery in quantities that made individual retail margins look frankly pathetic. Why pay 3 pence for a Black Jack at a corner shop when you could buy a multi-pack at Asda for pennies per unit? The consumer logic was sound. The cultural cost was immense. Between 1980 and 2005, the number of independent grocery and confectionery retailers in Britain fell by over half. The British Independent Retailers Association estimated the loss of around 50 corner shops per week at the peak of supermarket expansion in the late 1990s. Then, in 2008, the last pillar fell. Woolworths, which had survived 2 world wars, rationing, the decline of the British high street through the 1970s, the recession of the early 1990s, Woolworths went into administration on the 27th of November 2008. The proximate cause was the credit crunch, debt, an inability to compete on price against online retail and the big supermarkets. 807 stores, approximately 27,000 jobs, gone between November and January 2009 when the last stores closed. The pick and mix counters were cleared out, the plastic bins emptied, the chrome scoops removed. On eBay in the weeks after the closures, individual Woolworths pick and mix bags half filled. Some of them, the last bags ever filled from those counters, were selling for hundreds of pounds, which tells you something, which tells you everything, really. What we're talking about when we talk about these sweets isn't just sugar and additives and a penny here or tuppence there. We're talking about the texture of a particular kind of life, a life where you walked to the corner shop under your own steam at 7 years old and the owner knew your name, where you learned to make decisions, with real consequences, limited by real resource in front of a glass counter, where a 10-pence piece meant something, where something that cost a penny had genuine worth, genuine joy in it. We gave that up, not all at once, and not without reason. The supermarkets are cheaper, the regulations are probably safer, the high street probably needed updating. All of that is true, and none of it makes it easier to think about. The council estates where most of us grew up had corner shops on every other street. Now they have payday loan offices and vaping shops and the ghosts of things that used to matter. The teeth recovered, mostly. Dentistry improved, fluoride toothpaste. Regular checkups available on the NHS before the waiting lists became what they are now. The cavities got filled, the enamel got treated, the body healed. It's harder to say the same for the other thing, that particular texture of community, of knowing, of belonging to a street and a shop and a paper bag twisted at the top. Some things don't grow back. Some gaps stay gaps. And every now and then, you catch a smell, something sweet, something cheap, something chemical and artificial, and absolutely nothing like real fruit, and for half a second you're 7 years old again. And you're rich, and the whole world is behind that glass counter, waiting.